Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to completely deconstruct the most famous arena in human history and see what really made it tick. You know, when we look at the Colosseum today, it's easy to just see this incredible, beautiful ruin, a real testament to ancient engineering. But beneath all that travertine and concrete, there's actually a much darker, incredibly calculated story. We're going to pull back the curtain on this iconic structure to reveal not just how it was built, but more importantly, why.
So, how exactly do you erase the memory of Rome's worst tyrant? Well, let's dive right in, because the answer isn't some new law or a rewritten history book. Nope, it's a massive, 50-meter tall building made of stone and blood. You see, the real story of the Colosseum actually kicks off with a devastating fire and a massive PR disaster for the Roman elite.
70,000. Just wrap your head around that number for a second. That's the staggering amount of Roman citizens who could be seated in a matter of minutes inside a structure that was brilliantly designed to replace one man's incredibly selfish luxury. To understand how they pulled that off, we really need to look at the sheer political genius of the emperor who ordered the whole thing.
Part 1. Erasing a Tyrant's Legacy. To understand what the Colosseum was actually meant to do, we've got to start with that devastating fire and a deeply, deeply unpopular emperor, Nero. Back in 64 AD, a catastrophic fire just swept through Rome, reducing huge chunks of the city to absolute ashes. Naturally, suspicions started swirling that Emperor Nero himself had struck the match, just to clear some prime real estate for his own grandiose projects. And honestly, those rumors seemed pretty justified when he immediately turned around and built the Domus Aurea. This was an immense, wildly opulent private palace. We're talking artificial lakes, private woods, golden statues, built literally right on top of those ruined neighborhoods. It was the ultimate slap in the face to a starving population. But when Emperor Vespasian eventually took power, he knew he had to win the people back. So he executed an absolute masterstroke of propaganda. He actually drained Nero's massive private lake and decided to build a sprawling public amphitheater directly on top of it. The idea that where there was the luxury of one man, now arises the enjoyment of 70,000 citizens. That brilliantly captures the political genius at play here. Vespasian wasn't just building an arena, right? He was literally returning the very heart of Rome back to the people, completely free of charge. It was essentially a political promise, carved in stone. The message to the average Roman was unmistakable. The era of Nero's selfish excess, that's over. The era of Flavian generosity has officially begun. Part 2. The Flavian Engineering Marvel. Now, building a 189-meter-long behemoth in just 8 years, that is a logistical nightmare. 240,000. That's the estimated number of ox-drawn cartloads of travertine stone that an absolute army of workers had to drag 20 miles from the quarries in Tivoli straight into the center of Rome. They actually had to build a specific, dedicated road just to handle this massive, non-stop convoy of stone. We are talking about tens of thousands of laborers, slaves, and engineers working around the clock to pull this off. It's the kind of achievement that would be incredibly difficult even today with modern machinery, let alone back in the 1st century AD. But hey, getting the stone there was only half the battle. They also had to design a building that could safely filter tens of thousands of rowdy spectators in and out without causing a massive, deadly crush. So Roman engineers used a highly efficient system of numbered gates and passages called vomitoria to fill and empty the arena safely. Seriously, if you go to a major sports game today, your ticket tells you exactly which numbered gate, section, and row you need to go to. Well, the Romans literally invented that exact system.
And we definitely can't forget about the ground they were building on. Because Vespasian chose to put this amphitheater right over Nero's drained lake, the soil conditions were, well, terrible. To stop this colossal weight of stone from just sinking straight into the mud, the engineers poured a massive 12-meter-thick ring of concrete as a foundation. To put that in perspective, that's like a 4-story building buried underground. That incredibly deep, sturdy base is the main reason the structure is still standing today.
Comfort was a huge deal too. To keep the blazing Mediterranean sun off the spectators, the Colosseum featured a massive retractable awning called the velarium. But this thing was so enormous and so heavy that it took a highly coordinated effort of at least 240 specially trained sailors from the Imperial fleet, pulling on this crazy complex system of winches and ropes just to deploy it. Imagine that!
Part 3. Society set in stone. So the Colosseum wasn't just a physical feat of engineering, it was actually a physical map of Roman social classes. Your social rank literally dictated how close you got to sit to the bloodshed, which forced everyone to physically climb the social ladder. Think about it. The most powerful men in Rome, the emperor, the senators, the Vestal Virgins, they sat right at the edge of the arena. They could practically feel the sand kicking up at them. Just above them, the knights and your regular Roman citizens, and then, way up at the top, furthest from all the action, were the plebeians, women, and freed slaves. The entire society was perfectly, rigidly ordered, all watching together as a single entity. And the Romans telegraphed this strict hierarchy on the outside of the building too. On the exterior facade, they framed this social ladder using classic Greek architectural orders on each level. They started with the simple, sturdy Doric columns right at the bottom, then moved up to the slightly more decorative Ionic columns, and finally finished off with the highly ornate Corinthian columns up at the top. It was this incredibly elegant, ornamental language of beauty, wrapping what was, at the end of the day, a theater of death.
Part 4. The spectacle of control.
So, let's get to the main event. What actually happened on that wooden floor once those 70,000 people were seated and that giant sun awning was drawn? Well, powered by a hidden underground labyrinth of elevators and trapdoors called the hypogeum, the Romans ran a terrifyingly efficient all-day schedule. In the mornings, you'd have the Venetians. These were elaborate hunts featuring exotic beasts like tigers, bears, and elephants, basically showing off Rome's power and reach across the known world. At midday, the mood shifted to brutal public executions of criminals. Then, the afternoon brought the main event, highly choreographed, intensely lethal gladiatorial combat. And on incredibly special occasions, they'd actually remove the floor entirely, flood the basin, and stage the Naumachia. These were actual simulated naval battles with real ships, right there in the dead center of the city. Unbelievable. The sensory overload inside this place must have been absolutely unimaginable. The Romans constantly burned huge amounts of incense just to mask the metallic smell of blood that was soaking into the arena. That's the Latin word for the sand covering the floor, and yep, that is exactly where we get our modern English word arena. Add to that all this violence being accompanied by the blare of live trumpets and flutes, purposefully heightening the tension. It was a complete spectacle. But you see, this wasn't mere entertainment. It was a highly calculated strategy of control. The emperors provided free grain and spectacular, violent distractions, a political masterstroke famously known as bread and circuses. It was specifically designed to keep the often restless Roman population fed, distracted, and above all, completely loyal to the emperor. I mean, think about it. If the people are busy cheering for their favorite gladiator, they probably aren't plotting a rebellion, right? Part 5. The missing half. Of course, nothing lasts forever. If you look at the Colosseum today, you'll immediately notice that nearly half the building is just missing. It looks like a giant bite was taken right out of it. So what exactly happened? Well, its decline was a really slow process mapped out across centuries. By the 5th century, the games simply became way too expensive to run, and the rising influence of Christianity finally put an end to the bloody spectacles. Abandoned, the structure was just left to the mercy of nature and man. During the Middle Ages, it was used as a makeshift fortress, a shelter, and eventually it was just left to be totally swallowed by vegetation. Ultimately, nature dealt the biggest physical blow. Interestingly, though, when a massive earthquake hit in 1349, it only collapsed the south side of the structure. Why? Well, it comes down to a really fascinating quirk of geology. The north side of the foundation was resting safely on solid bedrock, while the south side was built on much weaker, unstable terrain. So, when that earthquake hit, the unstable side just gave way, completely bringing down half of the outer wall. But human scavengers absolutely did the rest. All those fallen travertine blocks, they were looted by popes and aristocrats to build fancy new palaces and churches all across Rome, including parts of St. Peter's Basilica. And here's a crazy detail. If you look closely at the Colosseum today, you'll see it is absolutely covered in thousands of little pockmarks. A lot of people mistakenly think these are bullet holes from modern wars, but they aren't. They are actually scars left by medieval metal hunters who literally chiseled into the stone facade just to rip out the precious iron clamps holding the blocks together so they could melt them down for tools and horseshoes. Here is a really fascinating paradox to wrap things up. We all call it the Colosseum, right? But its original name was actually the Flavian Amphitheater. The name Colosseum was adopted centuries later, and not because of the building's massive size, but because of a colossal 30-meter bronze statue of Emperor Nero that happened to stand right next to it.
Vespasian built this entire arena to make everyone forget Nero, but history has a pretty wicked sense of humor. The building ended up taking the name of Nero's statue anyway.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. Look at the design of modern sports arenas today. We still use the numbered gates, the tiered seating based on how much money you have, the retractable roofs, the fast food, and the highly publicized spectacles. Considering how much of this ancient blueprint we still use to keep ourselves entertained and distracted, are we still falling for Rome's oldest political trick? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. See you next time.